Is Kirk on?
Kirk Stoner is on, yes. Pauline Smith is also on.
We're muted.
I had it on mute.
Oh, okay, so we're ready to go?
Almost.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just getting you too.
Clearly, I'm a little excited here.
Ready to go.
Okay.
Okay, Gary is on.
Okay, then we'll let Gary take over. Done? Commissioner Eichelberger, are you going to start the meeting?
He is mute. I don't know. He's no video, but he's open.
There he is.
Okay, hey, I'm going to be in and out of this meeting because I'm in the terminal. So if somebody else wants to run the meeting, please.
Somebody else, all right. Somebody else will do that. Okay, so good afternoon, Cumberland County. We are calling to order the meeting of the Commissioners' Finance meeting on May 18th, 2022 at 1:30 p.m. We don't have any public comment in the room, but Teresa, do we have any online?
No, there's nothing online.
All right, so let's move on to agenda item number 3, which is the approval of the minutes of May 11th, 2022. Do we have a motion, please?
Move to approve the minutes of May 11th.
I will second that. So being moved and seconded, if we could have a vote, please. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No, so minutes are approved. Thank you. All right, so we will move on to item 4, which is Andrew Benner is here to discuss the statewide detention crisis and regional response. Thank you, Mr. Benner.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I think the PowerPoint is going to be coming up here.
Share one. Sorry.
So I did provide some documentation to you in addition to the PowerPoint that I've outlined. I provided you with the juvenile court judge's assessment, statewide assessment, which gives you some statewide data regarding juvenile detention services and kind of the problems that we're currently facing. So I put together a short PowerPoint presentation, certainly will provide clarity in any areas that you may have questions in. But wanted to really bring this issue to this group to just kind of advise, provide information, kind of let you know where things are at. And certainly with some of the plans that we have moving forward, which involve some type of financial commitment from the county, wanted to make sure that you're aware of that and kind of what my thought process is with regards to that. So really the statement of purpose, which some of these things come from the report that I had and just for some of the problems that we're facing. First of all, that we're in a state where high quality detention services are essential level of care needed within Pennsylvania for high risk youth. So we do have a number of high risk youth. Cumberland County prides itself in the use of detention services. We do it very sparingly, but we do need to use this type of service at times. We've had a number of recent cases here where we're really faced with a detention crisis and really have to think about community safety and really being faced with the situation. We're making the best of 2 bad decisions, I like to say. Neither of them are good, but we make the best of the, to try and minimize or mitigate any type of repercussion. And we've had several high profile cases here recently where we're faced with these types of decisions. And really it's caused by a number of detention centers closing, a number of staffing issues. You can see on there that we're one of 61 counties that share detention services right now with about 135 beds across the state. So 6 counties do have their own detention centers. We currently do not have access to them. They're not taking out of county kids because of the needs that are out there across the state. And one of the biggest ones most recently, which you may have read about, is the Schumann Center out in Allegheny County closed down, which put another big caused some pressure on the system because they obviously have to take those youth and move them to other facilities, which takes a lot of the beds that a lot of our other counties are currently using. There's not a lack of beds. We have detention beds. Staffing is a huge issue, which kind of leads to some of what I'll talk about as to why some of the plans that are being made that we're making decisions regionally of how to kind of handle this and equip our detention centers to be able to use and take our youth when needed. You can see about the detention centers closing, the number of detention centers closing. And then additionally, community safety risk obviously is a big concern, but also our staff, the resources that we're putting into this, the travel. I believe you're going to see a contract tomorrow for Jefferson County, Ohio, which is a facility that we're trying to contract with, which is a juvenile facility, but that's a 5-hour drive away. And we still have a cost that's associated with that. Some of that is fundable through our needs-based budget, but we're going to be sending probation officers 5 hours each direction to take youth out there if we get in that situation. Currently, we basically have our Cornell Braxis Youth Center, New Morgantown Center, which is another Braxis facility, which we very rarely have access to, and Center County, which we just had some problems with, but that's really our limitation of the 10. We don't have many options. And that's aside from shelter, just so you know, we do have some shelter facilities, but they're facing the impact as well. So one of the things that was talked about, I know, and I'll just glaze over this, but this was a number of months ago. Judge Smith had come to me. There was a conversation among the judges, and there was some talk about maybe looking at the Cumberland County Prison as a potential place that we could create a juvenile institution. After reaching out to the warden, talking with Chief Clerk Stacy Snyder, meeting on various levels, talking with human resources, really looked into this as long as some of the also requirements to do that. It just didn't make sense. So that was one of the solutions that we were looking at. I have some numbers attached. I won't go over them all, but you can view them. Really, the limitation there is that we would be limited to a 12-bed facility as opposed to having multiple. A bigger facility may make sense, but honestly, counties are kind of getting away from the detention business. And there's just so much criteria. It would require an extensive prison renovation to even meet the requirements. That just from a fiscal standpoint doesn't make any sense. And then the other piece that I'm here to talk about today is really looking at this option of program funding with our detention center, to potentially look at creating a contract with them for the next fiscal year. So I put together some numbers. You can look at them. The per diem, obviously, that we're being faced with right now with our Braxis in the proposal that I'm going to talk about today is about $465 a day. So that per diem there is a little low. That is the kind of the statewide average right now, acceptable rate. So that the income would be off a little bit, would be a little bit more. I priced it out at 90 and 75% capacity. And you can kind of see that it would make sense a little bit to have a little bit of a return on investment. However, that's all without factoring in the cost of the renovation. And then all of the other, and the part with the federal government and being involved in it, they could change things at any time, and then your prison renovations no longer meet standards and you got to do something else. So we really just didn't see, I wrote up a summary on it. It just really didn't make sense after the conversations we had at many different levels to do that. So what we're looking at is program funding contracting with Braxis. This is a regional model that's being set up. So what's going on? Honestly, I think the state should be getting involved in this a little bit, but they're not coming to anyone's aid right now. They are aware of the issue. You guys may have heard about it in some of your meetings, but there's no talk right now of funding counties or making counties whole with regards to this. But regionally, we're coming together with a number of our regions to look at our facilities that are local. So really looking at New Morgan Academy, which is down the turnpike, and looking at Cornell Braxis. I'm being told that Braxis would be our facility, which is right up on South Mountain. It's a facility we've used for a number of years, and really creating a contract with them. You're looking at paying about $425 a day per diem. The reason I'm here today is if those beds are filled, they would be paid for through our needs-based budget, which we already account for from a budgetary standpoint, and the county's reimbursed 50% for those beds. If the beds are unused, we would still have to pay for the beds. So that's where the cost comes in at. That's 100% county reimbursable. The county would have to pay that with no reimbursement, understanding no person in the bed, we would have to pay that cost. There are several things that I'm looking at. I have been able to make relationships and have good relationships with some others across the state that aren't going to be able to program fund beds. So we do have the ability to kind of mitigate some of the costs by allowing other counties to use our beds when they're facing detention needs. So if we would have a certain number of beds and they would not be filled, we could allow other counties to use those beds for periods of time. And at that time, then they would pay for the cost and we would not have to pay for that bed for that day, which would mitigate some of the overall costs. And then, like I said, our beds would be located up in South Mountain. To my understanding, that would be our kind of home location, which is convenient, local to home. Probably wouldn't have to worry about the Jefferson County contract. but obviously 3 beds, as I know over the years, I'm going to provide some data that'll show you kind of where I think we're at, but also understand we've had months where we have 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kids either in shelter or in detention. So we're still going to have a need to go outside from time to time, but at least it would give us some type of resource and ability to kind of adjust when needed. So just a little bit about our utilization. This is our utilization. I will tell you that, so I didn't, for total days, that includes detention and shelter. I combined the two because we do, when we make decisions, our detention center and our shelters in the same location, very similar setup at Abraxas. And sometimes we use shelter because we don't have a detention bed, and sometimes we use detention because we don't have a shelter bed. So they're used somewhat interchangeably from time to time. So it's really hard to separate the difference between the two. But I did look at the amount of days that we're using just as far as out-of-home beds with regards to our detention and shelter needs. And I looked at 2014 through 2019, 2020, 2021, with the pandemic and some of the crisis that we've been facing for a number of years now. That data just didn't make sense to me, and I don't think it's very accurate. I think if we go back to 2019 and earlier, it gives us a little more accurate picture of what our normal utilization is. That's why I selected the 5 years I did. Calculated all this by hand, looked at every single day, how many kids we had in, went down through all these 5 years, basically added up the number of days per month where we had youth in, actually the number of kids that we had in, and then totaled up the days is which how I came up with the totals. So looking at 14 through the time frame there, you can see we average about 1,201 detention days a year. And when I average that out, that comes out to be about 3.72 bed days. That means that we, at any given time, are averaging around 3 youth in detention. We have 3 youth in detention right now. But that's not to say that there are times when we don't have any youth in detention. And there are times when maybe we have 2 or 1 in detention. So it really does fluctuate, and this is a really difficult thing to predict because obviously I don't want to predict the need for detention services for youth, but when things happen, we certainly need those services available. So that's where I came up with the 3.72 days. I would say that I also calculated the number of 0 days and averaged that out. So by 0 day, I mean 15.6 days. That's an average of per year, the amount of days where we didn't have anybody in detention or shelter. So when you look at that as a 0 day for 15 days, that's for 1 bed. So that would be 45 days annually that I could already say that's kind of where we're falling of days where we'd be paying. Basically, unless we had another county using those beds, we'd have to be paying that rate for at least that amount of days. So just to kind of lay the foundation of where this is at, currently the New Morgan Academy, in the conversations with them in our region, they're looking at getting up to the point where they can operate a 24 bed facility. They're currently having significant staffing issues. When we talk about program funding, one of the reasons that we're doing this is because the facilities need the funds to make sure that they can run their operation. Right now, they can't even get staff to work in these facilities. The New Morgan Academy just upped their pay rate to $21 an hour, had an influx, and I think they have about 35 people that are going to be starting. And I expect that South Mountain's going to do the same thing. But they really need an influx of making sure that they have a guaranteed income to be able to fund their operation and pay their staff. Currently at Abraxas South Mountain, it's an 18-bed facility. Right now, because of staffing issues, they only have 6 beds that they're operating. So it's down because of the staffing issues, and they're not even close to capacity. As far as county requests and meetings that I've been in and participated in with our surrounding counties, I can tell you, and you can do the math quickly to see that this far exceeds 24 beds at New Morgan and including the 6 beds at South Mount. But these are the types of requests that counties are making. So Dauphin County is going to look at having 10 beds. They're going to contract for 10 beds. York's going to contract for 8 beds. Franklin County is going to contract for 6 beds. It's my understanding that Franklin County and Cumberland County would pretty much have the South Mountain facility because it makes sense for us. Through Berks in there because they're considering our region. I know they're a little bit further to the east, but Berks is going to look at having 8 beds in Lebanon County, so would have 2 beds as well, and then Lehigh is looking at 2 beds. Now they can't meet all those requests, but that's kind of where they're at with their requests within their own counties. But you can see this is a model that everyone's kind of going to. So certainly, if we're not open to at least considering this and trying to obtain some type of contract, we're going to be the ones left on the outside, reaching out to all these other counties in hopes that we can obtain a detention bed if needed. The additional consideration that I threw in here is we did just receive a new mandate to start in December of 2021 through the Juvenile Detention Prevention Act, the federal act that says that youth that are going to be charged with direct file offenses, so 15 or older with a deadly weapon, charged as an adult, prior to entering prison, which they currently do, they have to have an interest of justice hearing. And we put some parameters in place for that. But at that point in time, one of our common pleas judges could decide that even that youth charged as an adult should be held in a juvenile facility because they think it's more appropriate. There's some other things that have to take place, but currently that's just not going to be something we can do. We're already stretched very thin with our detention bed usage and what we have available. So that is another thing. You know, when I met with them and discussed this recently at our quarterly luncheon, they certainly would like to see more beds. I am trying to be somewhat fiscally discerning and coming up with a number I think that we can manage and really trying to minimize the cost. But they would like that ability. And if that's the situation and we have a youth that comes from an adult system to a juvenile system, that's a long process. I mean, that's a 6 to 8 month process, sometimes longer, before that youth even comes to trial, gets through the trial process, and any decisions made. So that could tie up a detention bed for a very long period of time. So just as far as to kind of, get to the reason, and lay this out in common terms, what we're looking at is the county's going to have to pay 100% of those detention costs if a youth is not in a bed. So if we have a day where we don't have a youth in one of our detention beds, that's a price or per diem that we're going to be paying. The total cost for 3 detention beds, and I'm recommending 3 based on our usage of 3.7. I think that's something that I'm certainly open to discussing. I think this isn't you lock in for 1 year and you're locked into that. We could readjust. I believe it's going to be in for the year, but after next year, we can reevaluate and see where we're at, and possibly look at maybe doing 2 beds, or maybe we need more. Maybe we're using that 3 pretty consistently and we need to up it. So certainly something we can revisit on an annual basis. I priced it out. I kind of look at the worst case scenario. So I said, look, if we have 3 beds and we never use one of them, that $465,000 is going to be what we're paying for if we don't put anybody in detention. I know that's not going to happen, but that's kind of like worst case scenario. So I threw it in there. The goal I've kind of set for our department is to really look at having 1 bed be open every day of the year. So, I mean, it's helpful when something occurs and you do have an open bed, but also realize that that's not going to often be the situation. But I feel like if I set a goal of having 365 days a year, saying like I know that may be what our total cost is, that gives me the ability to have 1 open bed, and also some of our mitigation strategies that we put in place. If we're sitting on 2 open beds and we have other counties reaching out, we can certainly give those beds away to other counties while maintaining still an option for us if we get an emergency call in the middle of the night, that we have to make that type of decision. So that the amount that I'm looking at is the $155,125. Again, it's not something I can predict. I don't know what's going to happen, but it is kind of where I have a target in mind to say, look, I think probably with 3 detention beds, based on what I know our usage is and some of the mitigation strategies that I have put in place, I believe that's a pretty accurate estimate of maybe the amount of days that we would have to pay for beds that are not being used.
And I just want to interject that the alternative to that, of course, would be having probation officers on the road instead of providing supervision, paying for potential hotel costs, the travel expense, right?
Correct.
So there is a cost to, continuing to source other facilities outside of Pennsylvania if we don't have that kind of the ability to be nimble, if you will.
Correct. And we've had, in the last, I'd say we're part of that survey where you could see, just some of the decisions that we've had to make. And I'd just say in the last 3 weeks, we've had numerous situations where, we've had out-of-state kids that I'm not even sure were, I don't know if they were legally in the United States or not. They were very limited in their speaking. that came through our county that were picked up, and we arranged for them to go back to someone who we don't even know. We think it was the mother. But that, it's situations like that where you'd like a little more time, but we didn't have a detention bed. We've had the gun theft recently with the 14 guns. One of those kids involved was a Cumberland County kid. We've had, I'm part of the general council. I sit on the general council for interstate compact issues and, trafficking and some of those needs. Those kids are required to be detained by us if we get those calls, so that they're not being released to people they shouldn't be. And we don't even have the ability right now. It's affecting all aspects of our system. We don't even have the ability to hold those types of kids. So having the services available, I think is the direction we need to head. So that's why I'm recommending that we at least entertain the idea and look at the idea of possibly contracting for a number of beds that we can certainly, know that we have these services available for our youth here in our county. And I think that I don't know that 3 is the answer. It may be 2, it might be 4, but at least it gives us a starting point of allowing us to kind of sift through that and see how that's helping us. So I will leave it there. Certainly open up the questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, these would be at South Mountain facility.
Correct. So my understanding is between us and Franklin County, because of our location, that our kids would not be sent to New Morgan. It makes more sense to have ours at South Mountain. So we're trying to contract with South Mountain.
All right, so the cost here goal is met, would not exceed 155,000. By doing this, what are we saving through probation officers' time travel? Do we have that number somewhere?
Yeah, I didn't calculate that. Certainly I think it's a cost that would be calculated. I don't know that it's going to be other than the time and the amount of time on the road. I don't know it's a huge cost as far as a savings. I think really what we're getting with the investment is the community safety aspect of having the ability. I think for us, we've had a lot of issues with our stakeholders, police officers, a number of other agencies with regards to not having these services available. And, certainly when you're dealing with a shooting in Shippensburg and these kids are coming up from Philadelphia and we don't have anywhere to put them and we have to let them go, I'm not sure what the ramifications of that going to be, especially if that youth goes out and does something after he's been released by our department. So I think that's really what the focus is with having the ability to provide a level of safety to our community. There's definitely cost associated, Commissioner DeFilippo, but I don't know that it's a significant amount that would cut into what the overall amount of spending is.
I got it. Okay, thanks.
I was going to ask what happens when we don't have a bed.
That's my point of making the best of 2 bad decisions.
Yeah.
We figure out what the worst decision is. We evaluate maybe who we have in detention that potentially we could get out if we have to put someone out, which one's worse. But at some point we're putting someone back into the community that probably, at least for a period of time until we do a proper assessment, until we figure out release options, it's just not safe. But if we don't have a bed, we don't have a bed. I mean, there's nothing we can do about that. We don't have anywhere else to put them. We're very limited on on the services we have available, and it's not much right now.
Okay, so which brings me to my next question. When you talk about Abraxas South Mountain and they have an 18-bed facility and only 6 beds are staffed, but I heard you say that they've hired something like 31 people.
So the New Morgan Academy, which
Okay.
is down the turnpike, they have just recently hired 35 people, I believe, to get them fully staffed to 24. And it's my understanding that South Mountain, prior to July 1st, when we would look to contract with them, is going to do a similar type thing to make sure that they have staffing to accommodate the beds that are being requested.
Okay, because I was going to say, what happens if we reserve, 3 beds and they don't have the staff for the beds?
That'd be a different story. We would be paying for
okay.
them, but
But
the idea is that
they're
they're getting. No, they're working on getting up to the staffing needs, and I don't think they would contract. I think what they'll do is they'll see how many beds they have, and then we may have to make some cuts. They may come back and say, look, at this point in time, you can have 2 beds. And then once we get fully staffed, they've talked about staffing as they increase, making the number of beds available increasing. So we may start at 2 and eventually get to 3 if that's our request,
Okay,
as they can accommodate.
okay,
And we can certainly, as the contract is drafted, work with the solicitor to ensure that if necessary language can be put in the contract indicating if they don't have the beds available, we won't be paying for them,
Sure.
yeah,
even if we contracted for them.
Right.
seems reasonable. Danny, you look like you've got something great to add here.
Well, there was a time that this was standard practice.
Okay,
It was, I mean, it's not in anybody's recent memory, because the market shifted and there were plenty of beds. But there was a time we always had beds like this available.
that is good to know.
And I would add that this doesn't take away from shelter. We still have our Abraxas Center or our Schaffner Center, which has an ownership change, but will be providing service to us. York County's limited now because I believe they're turning their shelter into a detention center because of their need in York County. But we also have the Abraxas shelter. So in addition to the detention beds, the 3 detention beds we would have, we still have shelter options that are going to be available because, like I said, there are times when we exceed 3. I mean, I can show you months where we have 8, 9 youth that are accounted for in some way, shape, or form out of their home and in some type of detention or shelter bed. However, that's all. Again, this is kind of the best we can use data to make a decision, let it inform us, and then hopefully with some of the other things mitigate the cost as much as we can, and then revisit down the road and see either one way or the other if we need to make any adjustments.
Okay. Anything else, Commissioner?
The very obvious question probably has a very obvious answer. Why can't we use our own prison to add a couple beds, and why does it cost? Why are these costs so high?
You mean versus the prison cost, the $465? That's the state rate for juvenile type facility. You can't use. So I'll say the only time we can use the prison for juvenile offenders is if there are direct file offenses, meaning they're charged as an adult. Even then, they have to be sight and sound outside of the normal prison population under 18, unless a judge in an interest of justice hearing makes a determination that they could be among them. So, and with the federal guidelines that are out there with regards, you cannot utilize the same staff, the same services. There can be no overlap between your juvenile detention center and your adult facility. So even if we did a renovation of the prison, it would almost have to be a whole separate facility created that would be attached, but no crossover in staff. You'd have to hire a whole new juvenile staff trained to deal with juveniles. You'd have to hire, everything would be kept separate from the prison. The only thing I believe food service could cross over, but outside of that, it's a whole separate operation. And I can certainly provide the federal guidelines on that. I think I did outline some of them, and I have that report somewhere. But it's significant, and it just doesn't. We're fortunate here in Cumberland County that we do have a pre-certified prison. So when we do get these adult offenders or youth outside of the new mandate, which we have a practice now put in place for these direct file cases. Matter of fact, I got to present to the MDJs on Friday to kind of update them on what our practice is. But we have a practice in place now where we can put our direct files into the prison, and they are pre-certified, pre-compliant, so that works. But there's no ability to take a 15-year-old just charged with a normal charge that maybe needs to be out of the community for a period of time and put them in an adult facility. As far as the rates, it's because of the accounting, the staffing issues. It's far different than what the prison rate is, and that's across the board. I think that rate that I gave you. So the way that the county operates and build contracts, they won't approve anything more than what the state approved rate is, and that's the state approved rate for juvenile detention services right now is at that $425. So.
Okay.
I have no more questions.
I do not either.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next steps on this topic is Andy will start working the contract together, and then that will come forward at a workshop.
Okay.
We just felt like this was a very data-rich topic. that it really deserved a little bit more discussion, so that you had enough time to really digest all of the information.
Yeah, and there may be, and look, this is such a big issue with what we're dealing with, and I envision the state getting involved at some point in time, and I think they either have to get involved and make the counties whole or pay a lower rate for days that you're not using the services as opposed to the full amount, or make the counties reimbursable in some way. But this is where we're at right now, trying to find a solution in the short term. That day
Yes.
comes. So,
Thank you.
any other questions? All right.
Okay, so let's go on to the next agenda item, which is the discussion and possible motion to support naming the tributary to the Connequa Creek in Camp Hill Borough, Blackberry Spring Run. And there is Kirk Stoner. And the floor is yours, sir.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Hard to follow Andy's presentation there, all data-rich stuff with something that's a little more mundane here, but we received a notice from the U.S. Board on Geographic Names, or BGN, requesting comment from the county on renaming, well, actually naming an unnamed tributary to the Connequa Creek in Camp Hill Borough. So it's a small unnamed tributary. It's not shown on USGS maps. It's not recognized as part of the National Hydrography Database, or NHD. So it's really kind of just a small tributary that runs. It's fully contained in Cybert Park. The Camp Hill Borough recommended approving the name to Blackberry Run. As part of BGN's process, they look to the county as well to provide input as well. So the official name would be Blackberry Spring Run. So they had sent us a note asking if we have any objections as a county. You know, I've looked at it. I really don't have any objections unless the board would, and would recommend that we would send a note back that's included in the correspondence indicating we have no issues with the name.
I don't have any questions. I read this and actually followed up with a member of Camp Hill Borough Council as well as with Kirk. Commissioner, do you have any questions?
No, I do not. I'll be happy to make a motion, but
Okay.
Scary online.
Yes,
I'm here,
Gary's
yeah.
okay.
I have another
Comments?
question. Kirk answered all my questions previously. It's fine.
Okay,
Then I'll make a motion that we support Camp Hill Borough's resolution 2022-4, naming the tributary to the Connequa Creek in Camp Hill Borough, the Blackberry Spring Run.
do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
All right, moved and seconded. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 And motion carries unanimously. There we go, Kirk.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other business to come before the board?
Gene, can I give one quick update on another project?
Of course,
So
yes.
I cleared just with Keith. I'm not looking for any commissioner action or anything. They're just purely information. It's kind of timely as well. The board may have seen, an hour or so ago, there was a press release about the Pennsylvania Broadband Authority forming and getting together, preparing to have kind of 100% internet coverage throughout the state, or 100% free internet throughout the state. So they'll be looking at taking the federal broadband infrastructure monies coming down to the state level and distributing it locally. As you're aware, we're working with Adams County and Franklin County on a regional broadband study. Those RFPs are due today. We had a call with the Broadband Authority today to discuss potential duplication of their efforts and our efforts. And I think we had a really good call with them to see how we could coordinate our two efforts. So I wanted to update the board that we're working with Adams and Franklin County to figure out how we're going to handle the RFPs, or the bids that have come in, and how we may work with the State Broadband Authority, because it sounds like the State Broadband Authority will be doing a lot of data collection that may have been in our scope of work. And also they may be looking to models of regional cooperation to kind of promote throughout the state. So we're going to try and work with them and show the model that we've been pursuing here, with the hope that maybe they would work with us. There appears to be funding to do some of these studies, as well as implementation of those studies in the future. So just wanted to bring the board up to speed on. It's kind of an interesting morning. We had that meeting. Shortly after it, there was a press release talking about the state broadband authority. So if you hear more about that, I wanted to let you know that we are working with them and we are coordinating their efforts with our efforts, and have more relevant information as we move ahead and with Adams and Franklin County in our study.
Any questions, commissioners?
No questions. I did have one other piece of business if we're finished with that one. I just wanted to let you know, I don't know if everybody saw it, but I received a text saying the Commonwealth Court has granted the preliminary action on the I-83 toll in question.
Yes, Gary, I just got an email on that a little bit ago too, and I was going to mention that, but I wasn't sure if it was accurate. So good, you can confirm that. It's wonderful news.
Could somebody repeat that? I couldn't quite hear. It was a little garbled.
Go ahead, Kirk.
Sure, we received word that the Commonwealth Court has granted our injunction for the I-83 tolling project.
Oh, that's good. Wow.
Yeah,
So is that public hearing then still necessary coming up on May 25th, or is that something different?
That's a good question. I asked our legal counsel about 2 minutes ago that same question. So whenever we get that, we'll let the board know.
All right.
We are prepared for that hearing. I'll be sending up, I actually have comments I'll finish up here a little bit to send up that we can take a look at and be prepared for that hearing, whether or not it happens.
I have not, I mean, I haven't been at a computer now, you know, in a little bit. So did that just come in an email?
Yes, I just got Lee Stinnett sent me an email, and apparently he texted Gary as well.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, thanks. That's good. Thanks, Kirk. Thank you, Kirk.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other business? All right, so we'll adjourn. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.